Can a movie be at the same time encouraging and gravely disappointing? I have found that it can. And this is a Drafthouse Diary for Thursday, December 19th, 2024, when I went to the Alamo Drafthouse at Westminster to see The War of the Rohirrim, a new Lord of the Rings animated feature. I'm going to talk first about some positive points for this movie, and then I'll get into what disappointed me about it. And finally, I will get into why I find it so encouraging in spite of that. The main positive point that I want to mention is that some of the artwork was exceptional, especially the backgrounds, the landscapes. They were very rich. They were almost photorealistic, but they still had some of the stylization that anime has at its best. And yeah, I'd say this qualifies as an anime. This was directed by Kenji Kamiyama, and a lot of its art was very much from the anime tradition in Japan. In addition, I thought some of the character designs, while not truly innovative, I thought they were very well executed and they captured aspects of the characters very well. Some of them reminded me of very early Miyazaki, like in Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. But these details about the artwork lead me directly into the first disappointment of this movie, and that is the artwork wasn't used well and it didn't come together properly. Clearly, there were a lot of art teams and animation teams on this, I presume working on different parts of the movie. I got the impression that there were different teams working on backgrounds versus characters versus other parts of the frames that we were seeing. And sometimes they seemed as if they were put together very carelessly. Proportions, for example, from scene to scene, the proportions of characters versus other parts of the frame seemed completely off. This is about the Rohirrim, the people of Rohan in Middle-earth. This is a Lord of the Rings movie. And there were times when the riders of Rohan seemed weirdly out of proportion to their own horses. I literally found myself wondering at times, why are the horse soldiers of Rohan all riding ponies? All of their mounts seem tiny compared to them. And I could rationalize that to say that, well, the artists were trying to portray how big and strong these riders were. I think that the riders of Rohan, if they were big and strong, they would have big and strong horses too. Put them on Clydesdales. Don't put them on these petite animals that they seem to be riding at some parts of this movie. And that kind of disconnect and disproportion in the artwork that we saw within a scene or even within an individual frame, that continued through the entire movie, and it was distracting. And it detracted from the quality of those individual elements, the fact that they were put together so questionably. But the bigger disappointment for me in this movie was the story. It is set in Middle-earth generations prior to the events in The Lord of the Rings. But remember Helm's Deep in the Two Towers, one of the great battle sites where the people of Rohan made their stand? This is about how Helm's Deep got its name. So one of our main characters is Helm Hammerhand, king of Rohan. But our main protagonist is his daughter, Hera. The main conflict in the story arises from treachery on the part of some of the lords who are supposed to be loyal to Helm, and the desire of the son of one of these lords to marry Hera, partly, I think, because he loves Hera in some way, but also because this is possibly a path to the throne for him and his house. Not a terrible setup for a story overall, but throughout, we see people making decisions and taking steps that make no sense. And they're not the kind of decisions that make no sense because they are exploring flawed characters who are making bad decisions. No, it seemed step by step as if, well, the plot needs this now, so we're going to have this character make that decision because it gets us to the next scene or the next act. It all seemed very artificial. It all seemed very forced. None of this came from characters, good or bad. And speaking of characters, good or bad, many of the characters we are supposed to be rooting for, the people we are supposed to be admiring as our protagonists. And I don't think this was subtle enough to really be setting us up with anti-heroes. The characters we're supposed to be looking up to made very bad decisions and acted out of selfishness or spite in ways that, again, they led to the scene that the filmmakers wanted to portray, rather than playing out a story organically using characters and character decisions that we could believe. So those are the main reasons why I was very disappointed in this movie, to which I'd been looking forward for quite some time. So given these disappointments, why did I find it encouraging? I find it encouraging primarily because it is another Middle-earth movie. It is another piece of media that is exploring Middle-earth and the Lord of the Rings and its background. And there is so much there. There is so much richness. I think there is room for lots of different portrayals, lots of different ways of approaching this material and this background and this setting. And even though I'm not a fan of some of what has come out, I loved the books, been reading those since I was a kid, very much liked the Peter Jackson movies. Not a big fan of the Hobbit movies. We didn't need to take a children's book and turn it into 3 long feature films. Also, not a big fan of the Amazon Rings of Power series. I think that is really doing a disservice to the story, and in particular, doing a disservice to some key characters. And as I've just said, I'm also disappointed by a lot of things about War of the Rohirrim. So that doesn't seem like a great track record. However, I do want people to continue to attempt to portray events in Middle-earth, not just the events we know from The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but also the bigger legendarium that J.R.R. Tolkien has created. There are pieces of the Silmarillion I would really like to see adapted, and I don't know that you could really adapt them well except with animation. So The War of the Rohirrim, as an animated feature, it opens the door to animation based upon The Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth in a way that I think wasn't really opened well by things like the Rankin Bass adaptation of The Hobbit, though that wasn't bad. I think that's a better adaptation of The Hobbit than the big movies were. And also Rankin Bass's peculiar adaptation of Return of the King, and Ralph Bakshi's strange but interesting and exciting adaptation of the first part of The Lord of the Rings. Those were Middle-earth-based animation, but they were more about, could this be done? And I think that War of the Rohirrim gives me hope that now in the 21st century, maybe we'll get some of those stories from the Silmarillion. Maybe we'll get some of those other things in the background and history of Middle-earth that can make interesting standalone stories. I just hope the execution of those is better than it was in this movie. I do want to tell you about other parts of my trip to the Alamo, but first, if you're enjoying this, please click that like button, the thumbs up here on YouTube, and if you want more of these Drafthouse Diary reviews, click subscribe. I do one of these for every one of my trips to an Alamo Drafthouse anywhere in the country. The Alamo pre-show for War of the Rohirrim was a lot of fun. It had, of course, a lot of Lord of the Rings related things and also general adventure movie related things. We had the trailer for a Hercules movie, which was really very much in keeping with the way they portrayed Helm Hammerhand in War of the Rohirrim. We also had a music video of Leonard Nimoy's song, Bilbo Baggins. That is classic. We also had another animation short, and we had several clips from other adaptations of Tolkien's work from different places in the world. We had long clips from a Russian adaptation of The Hobbit from 1985. These were live action with rather low-budget effects. We also had a Finnish version of The Hobbit from 1993, the Russian version of The Lord of the Rings from 1991. And the Russian version of The Lord of the Rings, the clip we got, that might have included Tom Bombadil. I'm not sure who that was in the clip that we saw, but it's nice to see Tom Bombadil on screen since we didn't get to see Tom in the Peter Jackson versions. Although in that version, the hobbits were also ridiculously small, like almost action figure sized, and they were weirdly feral, so it was a strange take on hobbits. We got trailers and commercials for those Rankin Bass animations of The Hobbit and The Return of the King, as well as a very Very impressed with itself and very interesting and fun trailer for the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings movie. So it was exactly the kind of pre-show that I expected and that I hoped for. It was a lot of fun in its own right, and it got me in the mood for an animated Lord of the Rings movie. I did get some dinner on this visit. I got the Breakfast Club sandwich. I hadn't had that in a while, but I've had it several times, and it has never disappointed. That should be more of a go-to for me because it's different than the burgers and the fried chicken, and it's always enjoyable. My darling wife was also with me on this visit and tried something interesting that I think should have worked, which is they now have on the menu that some of their salads you can get as a wrap. So you can get a salad with chicken added and get that as a wrap. So obviously they have the tortillas in stock. So it seems to reason that if they have the tortillas and they make sandwiches, you should be able to get a sandwich in the form of a wrap. And that's what my darling wife requested. She ordered and spoke to the server about this, who thought it was a very reasonable request. She wanted the fried chicken sandwich, but she wanted that in a tortilla as a wrap. And the server accepted that order, put it in, and had to come back and say, the kitchen said they can't do that. Don't know why they can't do that. In the past, there was never a problem with substituting the bun that a sandwich came on for the bun or the roll that was on the menu for a different sandwich. So I don't know why this isn't possible. I think they should expand their horizons as far as what they're willing to do as a wrap. I also, for purposes of science, I also got the hot cocoa and sugar cookies, part of their holiday menu every year. And once again, as I had found at other locations, the hot cocoa was good. It was rich. They do a good hot cocoa. But the sugar cookies, once again, they weren't store-bought like I once got. They were recently baked. They were not fresh baked as they've been in the past and as they are advertised in the menu. They were probably baked earlier that day, which means they were tasty, they were sweet, but they were very hard and crunchy. They weren't the warm, soft cookies that I've gotten in the past and that I think are much better than what they've been serving this year. All that said, I think the service was very good. As I mentioned, our server was trying to be very helpful, including with that special order. And it wasn't a full auditorium, but it was a pretty good crowd, and the service was relatively fast. Altogether, an enjoyable and interesting trip to the movies. Thanks for joining me for this Drafthouse Diary. I will be back soon with more. In the meantime, enjoy your movies, and when you do, stay till the end of the credits.